The Wyoming wind came down from the mountains like a living thing, slow and deliberate, brushing against the thin metal walls of Marcus Brennan's camper with the patience of something that had been waiting a long time. The camper sat crooked at the edge of a forgotten dirt road outside Sundance, perched on a patch of land so cheap most folks assumed it was worthless. Marcus stood beside it in the fading orange light, hands tucked deep into the pockets of his worn olive field jacket, the cold working its way through the seams like memories he couldn't shake. His breath showed in thin clouds drifting away into the gathering dark. Each exhale felt like something leaving him, something he'd never get back. Odin sat at his heel, tall, steady, unmoving. The German shepherd's amber eyes scanned the quiet stretch of pine woods behind the property with the precision of a soldier who'd never truly left the battlefield. His coat, black and tan, thick against the cold, rippled slightly in the wind. His ears stood sharp as blades angled forward, reading the silence the way most men read newspapers. To Marcus, he wasn't just a dog. He was the last living reminder that someone somewhere once trusted him with their life. 6 years ago, Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. The convoy moved through the desert like a steel centipede, 6 Humvees kicking up plumes of dust that hung in the air long after they passed. The heat was brutal, the kind that turned metal into weapons, the kind that made breathing feel like drowning. Marcus rode in the third vehicle, scanning the ridgeline through the window, his rifle resting across his lap. Beside him, Corporal Danny Martinez was talking about his daughter's birthday party, the one he'd missed for the 3rd year running. "She's gonna be 8, man," Martinez said, his Boston accent thick even in the Afghan heat. "8 years old and I've missed half of them." "You'll make it up to her," Marcus replied, not taking his eyes off the ridge. "Yeah, how well? By coming home alive." Martinez laughed. "You always know what to say, Lieutenant." Odin sat in the rear harnessed, alert, his eyes locked on Marcus. The dog had been with them for 18 months, explosive detection, patrol support. But more than that, he'd become the unit's compass. When Odin tensed, everyone paid attention. When Odin relaxed, they breathed easier. The IED hit without warning. 1 second, the world was dust and diesel fumes. The next, it was fire and screaming metal and the sky spinning like a broken compass. Marcus woke upside down, smoke filling his lungs, the taste of copper flooding his mouth. He couldn't feel his legs, couldn't move. The Humvee was on its side, flames crawling across the hood like living creatures, hungry and inevitable. Martinez wasn't moving. Marcus tried to call his name. Nothing came out but a wet cough. Blood ran down his face, into his eyes, warm and sticky. His left leg was pinned under something heavy. The heat was building, the flames growing closer. This is how it ends, he thought, burning alive in the Afghan desert. Then came the weight, heavy, insistent, claws scraping against metal. The dog's jaws clamped onto Marcus's tactical vest, pulling, dragging teeth locked with the kind of determination that doesn't ask permission or wait for orders. Marcus felt himself sliding across shattered glass through smoke into open air. His legs screamed in protest. Something tore, something broke, but Odin didn't stop. 8 seconds. That's how long it took Odin to pull him from the wreckage. 9 seconds later, the Humvee exploded. The blast threw them both 20 feet. Marcus landed hard, the air knocked from his lungs, his vision going white, then black, then white again. When he could see, when he could breathe, he turned his head. Odin lay beside him, panting, bleeding from a cut above his eye, but alive. Alert, already trying to stand. Beyond them, the Humvee burned. An inferno, unrecognizable. Martinez was still inside. Marcus screamed, tried to crawl back, tried to move. Odin stepped in front of him, gentle but firm, blocking his path. "No, you can't save him, but you can live." Marcus collapsed, his hands clawing at the sand, his throat raw from screaming or smoke or both. 2 other team members pulled him away, held him down. Watch the flames. Martinez never made it out. Marcus woke up 3 days later in a field hospital, bandaged and broken, with Odin lying beside the cot, head resting on his paws, eyes never leaving Marcus's face. A nurse told him later that the dog refused to move, refused food, refused everyone except Marcus. "You're stuck with me now, boy," Marcus had whispered, his voice raw. Odin's tail thumped once against the floor. A promise, a pact, present day, Wyoming wilderness. The words painted on the side of the beat-up camper had faded almost to nothing. Mercer's Mobile Repairs. Call anytime. Someone else's dream, someone else's life. Marcus had bought it for $800 from a widow in Billings who cried when she handed him the keys. Her husband had died of lung cancer 2 months prior. She couldn't bear to look at the camper anymore. Now it was home. He'd parked it on 40 acres of scrubland he'd purchased sight unseen from an online auction. 40 acres of pine trees, rocky soil, and silence. The kind of land nobody wanted. The kind of land that asked no questions. It cost him everything he had left, including $900 for something the listing called vintage industrial rail car, as is, no refunds, buyer responsible for removal. The people in Sundance had opinions about that. Juniper's Diner sat on Main Street like it had been there since the beginning of time, all faded red paint and grease-stained windows that caught the morning sun and turned it amber. The bell above the door jingled when Marcus pushed through Odin at his side. The place went quiet. Not hostile, just watchful. The kind of quiet that happens when a stranger walks into a small town and everyone's trying to figure out what brought him and whether he'll stay. An older woman behind the counter looked up from wiping down the coffee machine. Her hair was silver pulled back in a loose bun, and her eyes were kind, despite the lines that creased her face like a well-read map. She wore a name tag that read Birdie in fading script. "Morning," she said. Her voice had the warm rasp of someone who'd spent a lifetime talking to people. "Counter or booth?" "Counter's fine." Marcus slid onto a stool. Odin sat beside him perfectly still, eyes forward professional. The woman set down a menu and a glass of water, studying Marcus with the practiced assessment of someone who'd served thousands of customers and could read most of them within 30 seconds. "I'm Birdie Holloway. Heard you bought the old Hutchins land out near the Eastern Pines." "Word travels fast." "Small town, only kind of speed we got." She smiled, then glanced at Odin. Her expression shifted, softening. "Beautiful dog, military." Marcus nodded once. "What branch?" "Navy, SEALs." Birdie's expression shifted into something deeper. Recognition, respect. "My nephew served, Marines, Fallujah." She didn't say more, didn't need to. The weight of that single word said everything. She disappeared into the kitchen and returned a moment later with a plate of scrambled eggs, hash browns, and toast, along with a small bowl of sausage links that smelled of sage and black pepper. "For your partner," she said, setting the bowl on the floor near Odin. Odin lowered his head, sniffed the sausage once, a long, deliberate inhalation that seemed to catalog every ingredient, then turned his face away with the kind of slow, deliberate dignity that somehow looked like judgment. Birdie laughed, a genuine sound that filled the diner. "Well, I'll be. Picky eater, huh?" "He's got standards," Marcus said quietly, cutting into his eggs. "Can't fault him for that." Birdie refilled his coffee without asking. "You settling in all right out there, getting there. Find everything you expected with that railcar purchase." Marcus looked up. Her tone was casual, but her eyes weren't. "Still exploring," he said carefully. Birdie nodded, seemed about to say something else, then noticed movement at the other end of the counter. Two men in denim jackets leaned close, voices low but not low enough. "That's the guy," one muttered. Thick neck, sunburned face, hands like hammers wrapped around a coffee mug. "Bought that rusted-out rail car for $900 when he's living in a damn camper." The other man snorted, shaking his head. "Hell, probably spent his last dime on junk metal instead of fixing a roof over his head. What kind of sense does that make? Lost his mind overseas, I'm telling you. PTSD or whatever they call it. Seen it before. Shame, seems like a decent enough guy. But buying scrap metal nobody wants. That's not right in the head." Marcus kept his eyes on his plate, chewing slowly, methodically. The words didn't surprise him. He'd heard worse. Variations on the same theme in every town he'd drifted through in the past 4 years. Broken, lost, damaged goods, but they hooked into him anyway. Found the soft places, the doubts. Birdie shot the men a look sharp enough to cut glass. "Y'all got nothing better to do than gossip like church ladies on a Sunday afternoon." The men shrugged, went back to their coffee, but their eyes kept drifting to Marcus, assessing, judging. Marcus finished his eggs in silence, left a $10 bill on the counter, more than the meal cost, and stood. "You need anything out there?" Birdie said. Her voice, quiet now, meant only for him. "You come find me, understand?" Marcus met her eyes, saw something there, not pity, something else. Recognition, maybe. Or warning. "Appreciate it." The bell jingled again as he left. Outside, the wind had picked up. Clouds were rolling in from the west, low and heavy, the kind that promised snow before nightfall. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees since he'd entered the diner. Odin walked beside him, steady as a shadow, and together they headed back toward the land that nobody wanted. The land that had called to Marcus in a way he didn't understand, not yet. The property line was marked by a sagging barbed wire fence and a weathered wooden post that leaned like a drunk trying to remember which way was home. Beyond it, the land stretched out in waves of scrub grass and scattered pine rising gently toward a ridge that cut against the sky like a serrated blade. Marcus had walked the entire 40 acres twice since arriving. Both times he'd felt the same strange pull, the same inexplicable certainty that he was supposed to be here. It didn't make sense. Nothing about his life made sense anymore. He'd left the Navy SEALs 4 years ago, medically discharged after the Kandahar incident left him with a titanium rod in his left leg and night terrors that made sleep a battlefield of its own. The first year was the worst. Waking up screaming, seeing Martinez burning, feeling the heat, smelling the diesel and scorched flesh. The VA had offered therapy, pills, support groups. Marcus had taken the pills for 8 months, then thrown them away. They didn't stop the dreams. They just made him numb to everything else, made him feel like he was watching his own life through frosted glass. So he'd started moving, drifting. Boise, Missoula, Rapid City, working odd jobs, construction security, anything that didn't ask questions or require him to stay in one place too long. He'd saved just enough to buy this land, this camper, this silence, and the rail car. $900. Everyone thought he was crazy. Maybe they were right. The morning after his visit to Junipers, Marcus set out to clear some of the overgrowth near the eastern edge of the property. The pines grew thick there, tangled with brush and deadfall that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. He figured he'd at least make a path, give himself something to do, something to focus on besides the dreams. Odin trotted ahead, nose to the ground, tail level, and relaxed. This was his element, up and land, clear objectives, no ambiguity. They worked in silence. Marcus with a hatchet, Odin with his instincts moving through the trees like smoke given shape. 20 minutes in, Odin stopped. Just stopped. Every muscle in the dog's body went taut. His ears swiveled forward, locked onto something deeper in the woods. His tail dropped to a neutral position, not tucked in fear, but lowered in working mode. Marcus lowered the hatchet. "What is it, boy?" Odin didn't move, didn't look back, just stared into the forest with an intensity that made the hair on Marcus's arms stand up. Marcus knew that posture, had seen it 100 times in Kandahar. It was the posture Odin took 3 seconds before an ambush, 2 seconds before a buried IED, 1 second before everything went sideways. The posture that meant pay attention, something's wrong. "Odin," Marcus said quietly, his voice dropping into the command register he'd used downrange. "Let's go." The dog didn't budge. Marcus stepped closer, following Odin's line of sight. The forest ahead looked no different from the rest, thick, quiet, ordinary. But Odin didn't do ordinary. "All right," Marcus murmured. "Show me." Odin moved forward, slow and deliberate, weaving through the pines with the precision of a scout entering hostile territory. Each step calculated, each pause purposeful. Marcus followed, his pulse ticking upward, old instincts sharpening. His hand drifted to his belt, where he kept a fixed blade knife. Not that he expected trouble, but old habits die hard. They walked 200 yards deeper into the woods. And then Marcus saw it. At first, he thought it was a rock formation, some kind of natural outcropping, covered in moss and vines, half buried under decades of pine needles. Then the angles registered, the rust, the rivets. It was a rail car, a diesel locomotive car from the 1970s, sitting alone in the middle of the forest, half buried in accumulated organic matter vines, crawling up its sides like veins trying to reclaim it for the earth. Marcus stopped, his breath caught somewhere between his lungs and his throat. What the hell? The nearest railroad tracks were 35 miles south, running along the old Union Pacific line that serviced the coal mines in Campbell County. There was no road leading here, no path wide enough for a vehicle this size. No way this thing could have just appeared in the middle of a pine forest. And yet here it was. Odin circled the car once, nose working the air with professional thoroughness, then stopped at the side door and sat, perfectly still, perfectly patient. His eyes flicked back to Marcus. This is what I wanted you to see." Marcus approached, slowly, hard hammering now, adrenaline trickling into his veins the way it used to before a breach, before a raid, before everything went loud and fast and irreversible. The door was rusted shut, oxidized to the point where the metal had fused with the frame. But the latch was still intact, visible beneath the corrosion. He pulled his multi-tool from his belt, worked the screws loose with fingers that had started to shake slightly. The door resisted. Then with a sharp yank and a screech of protesting metal, it swung open. Stale air rushed out. Dry, metallic, old. The smell of rust and time and secrets kept too long. Marcus stepped inside. The interior was gutted, seats torn out decades ago, walls stripped down to bare metal studs, everything covered in dust and cobwebs thick as curtains. Light filtered through gaps in the roof, creating columns of illumination filled with dancing motes. But at the far end, past the empty shell of the main compartment, was another door. This one was closed, locked. Marcus tested the handle. Solid, reinforced. Someone had installed a deadbolt industrial grade, the kind used on bank vaults or military facilities. He looked back at Odin, who sat framed in the doorway, watching with those amber eyes that had seen men die and somehow kept their faith anyway. Someone didn't want people getting in here, Marcus said aloud, his voice echoing in the empty space. He worked the lock with his multi-tool patience and pressure, listening to the tumblers, feeling for the sweet spot. It took him 12 minutes longer than it should have, but his hands weren't as steady as they used to be. Something clicked. The door swung inward on hinges that had been oiled recently. Within the last year, Marcus guessed, someone had maintained this. And Marcus's world tilted. The room was small, maybe 10 feet by 10, but it was intact, preserved, deliberate. A metal table sat bolted to the floor, its surface clean despite the dust everywhere else. On it, maps, documents, photographs, all carefully arranged in clear plastic sleeves organized with military precision. Marcus moved closer, his hands trembling, now his breath coming shallow and fast. The map showed the surrounding area. Pine Valley, Sundance, the Ridge, his land. Red markings covered sections of the topographic map. Circles, X's, notations in tight military handwriting that looked like it had been made with a drafting pen. Contamination Zone, 1974. Buried Site Alpha. Chemical Waste Project. Sentinel. Unauthorized disposal. Groundwater flow. Dangerous. Marcus's eyes moved to the photographs. Men in uniform, Army Corps of Engineers patches visible on their shoulders. Standing beside heavy equipment, beside trucks with Department of Defense markings, beside freshly dug trenches that scarred the earth like wounds. And in the center of one photo, standing apart from the others, with his arms crossed and his expression grim, was a man Marcus had never met, but whose face he recognized from a single picture his mother kept in a drawer she thought he didn't know about. Tall, jaw like granite, eyes the same gray-blue as Marcus's own. A colonel's eagle on his collar. Beneath the photo, lying on a thin chain, was a metal dog tag. Marcus picked it up with fingers that had gone numb. The metal was cool, familiar. He'd worn one just like it for 8 years. Brennan Evander J. Cole, U.S. Army, Corps of Engineers, OPOS Catholic, his grandfather. The man who'd disappeared when Marcus was 3 years old. The man his family said had run off somewhere. Abandoned his wife and son without explanation. Vanished without a trace. The man Marcus had grown up believing was a coward. Marcus sank onto the edge of the table, the dog tag cold in his palm, his vision blurring. His mother had never talked about Evander. His father, Evander's son, had died when Marcus was 12, took whatever he knew about his father to the grave. The few times Marcus had asked his grandmother had just shaken her head and said, "Some men aren't meant to stay." But standing in this hidden room surrounded by evidence carefully preserved and deliberately hidden, Marcus understood. Evander Brennan hadn't run. He'd been silenced. On the corner of the table sat an old cassette recorder, dust-covered but intact, the kind reporters used in the 1980s. Beside it, a single tape labeled in the same tight handwriting as the maps, "If you find this, you heard the dog." Marcus's hands shook as he pressed play. The tape hissed, crackled. Decades of magnetic decay struggling to give up their secret. Then a voice, old, tired, but steady as bedrock. November 12, 1985. My name is Colonel Evander James Brennan, United States Army Corps of Engineers. If you're hearing this, you've found what they tried to bury, both literally and figuratively. A pause, the sound of breathing, paper rustling. Project Sentinel was authorized in 1971 as a chemical weapons testing and disposal program. The official story was that all materials were destroyed or safely stored at approved facilities. That was a lie. Between 1972 and 1974, over 255-gallon drums of contaminated materials, Agent Orange derivatives, experimental nerve agents, radioactive waste were buried in Pine Valley, Wyoming. Right here, where I'm standing now. Another pause. Longer this time. I was the supervising engineer. I signed off on the site surveys. I believed we were following protocol. But when I started seeing the health reports, the cancer clusters, the birth defects in livestock, I went back. I tested the soil, the groundwater, and I found proof that the containment failed within 18 months. The barrels corroded, the contaminants leached into the aquifer. The voice grew harder now, angrier. I reported it to my commanding officer, to the Department of Defense, to the EPA. They buried my reports, destroyed my samples, transferred me. When I persisted, they threatened me, told me I was suffering from stress, post-traumatic issues. They offered me early retirement with full benefits if I kept quiet. A bitter laugh. I refused, so they made me disappear. This recording, these documents, these maps, they're my insurance. If my family ever finds this, if my son or grandson ever stands where I'm standing now, I want them to know I didn't run. I didn't abandon you. I fought. And I'm leaving you the tools to finish the fight. The voice softened. To whoever finds this, listen to the dog. If a dog led you here, trust him. Dogs know danger before we do. They know truth before we do. They don't lie. They don't cover up. They just know. One more pause. I'm sorry I couldn't finish this myself, but maybe that's not how these things work. Maybe the truth takes generations. Maybe it needs a Brennan who doesn't carry the weight I carried, who can fight without the burden of failure. The tape clicked off. Silence filled the room like water filling a grave. Marcus sat there, the dog tag clutched in his fist, his grandfather's voice echoing in his skull. Outside, through the gaps in the rail car, he could hear Odin moving, patrolling, protecting, the same way he protected Marcus in Kandahar, the same way he'd led Marcus here. Listen to the dog. Marcus's throat was tight. His eyes burned. He hadn't cried since Martinez died, had locked that part of himself away, because crying didn't bring anyone back, and it didn't stop the dreams. But here in this tomb of truth, his grandfather had built something cracked open. I'm listening, Grandpa, Marcus whispered to the empty air. I hear you. Outside, Odin barked once, sharp, clear, a warning. Marcus was on his feet instantly, adrenaline flooding his system, his hand going to the knife at his belt. He moved to the door, staying low, using the frame for cover. Through the trees, maybe 50 yards out, he saw it. A black Mercedes SUV parked at the edge of the clearing where the forest thinned. Engine off. Windows tinted dark enough to hide whoever sat inside. A man stood beside it, tall, mid-40s, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that didn't belong anywhere near these woods. Italian leather shoes. Hair slicked back with precision. His smile was polite practice, the kind that never reached the eyes. Those eyes, gray and flat as winter stone, swept the clearing, cataloged the railcar, found Marcus standing in the doorway. Mr. Brennan, the man called out, his voice smooth as oil poured over glass. Good afternoon. Marcus didn't move, didn't respond, just watched. Odin positioned himself between Marcus and the stranger. Body tense, ears forward, every muscle coiled and ready. The man raised his hands slightly, palms out, a gesture of peace that somehow felt like a threat. My name is Callaway Whitmore, Regional Development Consultant. I heard you'd moved into the area. Thought I'd stop by, introduce myself. Make sure you're settling in all right. How'd you know my name? Marcus asked, his voice flat. Whitmore's smile widened a fraction. Small town. Word travels faster than the wind out here. His eyes flicked toward the rail car again, lingering just a moment too long on the open door. Interesting find you've got here. Vintage piece. Railroad enthusiast. Something like that. Must have cost you a pretty penny. $900. Whitmore chuckled, a sound manufactured for effect. A bargain then, though I imagine most folks around here think you overpaid for rusted scrap. Marcus said nothing, just waited. Whitmore took a step closer. Odin's lips pulled back slightly, revealing teeth. Not quite a snarl, a warning. Easy there, boy, Whitmore said, his tone light but his eyes never leaving the dog. Afghan vet right, K9 unit, beautiful animal, well-trained, expensive investment. He looked back at Marcus. I actually wanted to talk to you about your land purchase, Mr. Brennan. The consortium I represent has a keen interest in this area. We're looking at development opportunities, tourism, eco-lodges, that sort of thing. Your 40 acres would fit nicely into a larger project we're planning. Not interested in selling. I haven't made an offer yet. Whitmore's smile remained fixed. We're prepared to be very generous. Triple what you paid. Page, quick closing. You could take that money, buy somewhere more hospitable, maybe closer to VA services, better support systems. The mention of VA services was deliberate, calculated, a way of saying, I know about you, I know you're damaged. Marcus's jaw tightened. I said not interested. Whitmore was quiet for a moment, his expression unchanging, but something shifted in his posture, a subtle hardening, the polite mask staying in place while the threat beneath it showed its teeth. Mr. Brennan, I want you to understand something. This area has a complicated history, old projects, old stories. Sometimes the past is better left where it is. Digging it up doesn't help anyone. In fact, it can cause a lot of unnecessary pain. Wow, that a threat, a courtesy. I'm trying to help you avoid stepping into something that could get messy. Whitmore gestured at the forest around them. These woods can be dangerous. Lots of folks get lost out here. Lots of old things buried that are better left alone. For everyone's sake. Marcus took a step forward. Odin moved with him, a synchronized unit. You finished? Whitmore studied him for a long moment, and for the first time Marcus saw something real in those flat gray eyes. Assessment. Calculation. A predator deciding whether the prey was worth the effort. Finally, Whitmore stepped back toward his SUV. Enjoy your land, Mr. Brennan, but think about my offer, and be very careful where you dig. He paused with his hand on the door handle. Sometimes things stay buried for good reason. People who forget that tend to have unfortunate accidents. The engine purred to life, expensive and quiet. The SUV rolled away slowly, deliberately disappearing into the trees like smoke. Marcus stood there, his pulse hammering his mind, racing through tactical assessments he'd thought he'd left behind in Afghanistan. Odin looked up at him, eyes steady, waiting for direction. Marcus looked back at the rail car, at the maps, at the truth his grandfather had died protecting. The land he'd bought wasn't random. It wasn't luck. It wasn't even fate. Someone had made sure this land stayed buried under the name of a stranger. Someone who wouldn't know. Someone who wouldn't ask questions. Someone who'd be easy to dismiss as crazy or broken, or both. But they hadn't counted on Odin, and they hadn't counted on Marcus being Evander Brennan's grandson. We're not going anywhere, boy, Marcus said quietly. Odin's tail moved once, deliberate, affirmative. Night fell over Wyoming like a curtain dropping on a stage swift and absolute. Marcus sat inside the camper, the windows fogged from the small propane heater, rattling in the corner, casting wavering shadows across the cramped space. The cassette tape sat on the fold-out table in front of him, along with the maps he'd photographed with his phone, the dog tag, and a photograph of his grandfather standing beside a group of soldiers, their faces young and serious, unaware of what would come. He'd never known Evander Brennan, had only the vaguest childhood memory of a funeral his grandmother said was for someone we used to know. He'd grown up with the story that his grandfather was a coward, a man who walked away from his family, who chose what? The story never said, just that he'd left. But now sitting in this camper with his grandfather's voice still echoing in his head, Marcus felt closer to the man than he ever had to his own father. Odin lay near the door, head on his paws, but his eyes were open, fixed on the darkness outside. Marcus picked up the dog tag, running his thumb over the engraved letters, worn smooth by time and touch. You tried to do the right thing, he whispered to the metal, to the memory, to the ghost of a man he'd never meet. And they buried you for it. Outside, a branch snapped. Odin's head shot up. Marcus went still, his hand instinctively moving toward the knife he kept on his belt. Every nerve lit up, every sense sharpening. Through the small window he saw it, a flashlight, moving slowly through the trees near the rail car, maybe 100 yards out. Then another. 2 lights, maybe 3. Hard to tell in the dark and the way the trees fractured the beams. Someone was out there, watching, searching. Marcus killed the light inside the camper and moved to the door, Odin already at his side, silent as smoke. He cracked it open just enough to see 3 figures, moving carefully, methodically, sweeping the area around the rail car with handheld lights. They wore dark clothing, moved with purpose. Not hikers, not hunters, professionals. One of them stopped at the rail car door Marcus had opened earlier, examined it, spoken to a radio, his voice too low to hear, but the posture unmistakable. Target confirmed. Evidence of entry. Another figure approached carrying what looked like a tablet or electronic device. Scanning, photographing. Marcus's breath caught. They were documenting, gathering intelligence, preparing. The third figure raised a radio to his mouth, spoke quietly, then turned and looked directly at the camper. Marcus froze. Even in the dark, even at this distance, he felt the weight of that gaze. The figure lowered the radio, said something to the others. All 3 lights turned off simultaneously. Darkness swallowed them. Marcus counted to 60 in his head, barely breathing. Odin remained motionless beside him, every muscle taut, reading the night with senses Marcus couldn't match. When the count hit 60, Marcus heard it. Engines, distant, getting quieter, moving away. They were leaving, for now. Marcus closed the door and locked it, though he knew a lock wouldn't stop anyone who seriously wanted in. He sat down on the bed, his heart still pounding, his hands shaking slightly with adrenaline dump. Odin pressed against his leg. Solid, grounding, real. Marcus reached down, rested his hand on the dog's head, feeling the warmth, the steady presence. "They know we found something," Marcus said quietly. Whitmore wasn't bluffing. Odin's tail thumped once against the floor. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled to a number he'd saved months ago but never used. A contact from his old unit who'd gotten out and gone to law school, who'd dedicated her practice to helping vets navigate the VA bureaucracy and fight for benefits. Her name was Faye Ashford. If anyone would know what to do with what he'd found, it was her. He typed out a text, "Found something in Wyoming. Military cover-up. Environmental contamination. People threaten me today. Need help. Can you come?" He hit send before he could second-guess himself. 3 minutes later, his phone buzzed. "Send me your coordinates. I'll be there tomorrow morning. Don't talk to anyone else until I arrive." Marcus sent his location and set the phone down. He didn't sleep that night, just sat with his back against the wall, Odin at his feet, watching the darkness and waiting for dawn. And when the sun finally rose, casting pale gold across the frozen ground, Marcus Brennan made a decision that would change everything. He wasn't running, not this time. The Sundance Public Library occupied a brick building that looked like it had been standing since Wyoming became a state. 2 stories, narrow arched windows, and a copper roof gone green with age and weather. Inside, the air smelled of old paper lemon polish and that particular mustiness that comes from thousands of books slowly aging together. Marcus pushed through the heavy wooden doors at 8:30 in the morning, Odin at his side. The floor creaked under their weight, each board announcing their presence with a different pitch. Behind the circulation desk sat a woman who looked to be in her late 60s, silver hair pinned up in an elegant twist that somehow made her look both severe and kind at the same time. Reading glasses hung on a beaded chain around her neck. She glanced up from a stack of books, and her eyes widened slightly at the sight of the German Shepherd. "Service animal?" she asked, her voice carrying the crisp enunciation of someone who'd spent a lifetime around proper grammar and complete sentences. "Yes, ma'am." She nodded once satisfied. "Then you're both welcome. Library policy." She set down the book she'd been processing. "I'm Cordelia Hart, head librarian for the past 32 years. What can I help you find?" Marcus approached the desk, pulling a small notebook from his jacket pocket. He'd written down everything he could remember from the railcar the night before. Dates, names, Project Sentinel, his grandfather's service number. "I'm looking for historical records. Anything about military activity in Pine Valley between 1970 and 1985. Specifically Army Corps of Engineers projects." Cordelia's expression shifted. Something flickered behind her eyes, recognition maybe, or concern, or both combined into something more complicated. "That's a very specific time frame," she said carefully. "Yes, ma'am." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes moving from his face to his hands to Odin and back again. Reading him the way Marcus imagined she'd raid thousands of patrons before him. "You're the one who bought the Hutchins land," she said, not a question. "That's right. And the railcar?" Marcus nodded. Cordelia removed her glasses, folded them carefully, and set them on the desk. "What's your interest in Project Sentinel, Mr. Brennan?" The use of his name didn't surprise him anymore. Small towns had their own intelligence networks that would put the CIA to shame. What surprised him was that she knew about Sentinel at all. "You've heard of it," Marcus said. "I've lived here 52 years, Mr. Brennan. I've heard of a lot of things that don't appear in the official records." She stood moving with the careful grace of someone whose joints protested more than they used to, but whose mind remained sharp as ever. "Follow me." She led him through narrow aisles lined floor to ceiling, with books past reading tables where a few locals sat with newspapers and coffee thermoses, down a set of stairs to the basement level, where the air grew cooler and damper and smelled of concrete and time. Cordelia pulled a chain on an overhead bulb, flooding a small archive room with harsh yellow light. Metal filing cabinets lined the walls. Cardboard boxes stacked 3 high formed a second wall behind them. "The official records say nothing happened," Cordelia said, running her fingers along the cabinet labels with the surety of someone who knew this space in the dark. "The Army conducted environmental surveys in the 70s. Found nothing. Issued reports saying the area was clean. End of story." She pulled open a drawer, extracted a manila folder thick with age, and set it on a small table. But the unofficial records tell a different story. Inside were newspaper clippings, yellowed, brittle. Some photocopied, some original, all arranged in chronological order. September 12, 1974. Local man claims military dumping site. Officials deny March 3, 1976. Construction crew reports. Mysterious barrels. Army says training exercise, November 8, 1984. Colonel Brennan testifies about alleged contamination. Pentagon dismisses claims, February 15, 1985. Colonel Evander Brennan missing. Family seeks information. Marcus's hands went cold. There was a photograph. His grandfather. Younger than in the picture from the rail car, maybe 45, but unmistakable. Standing in what looked like a congressional hearing room, pointing at a large map mounted on an easel. The caption read, Colonel Evander Brennan testifies before State Environmental Board about alleged contamination in Pine Valley. Army representatives dispute claims. He tried to expose it. Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Cordelia nodded slowly. He presented evidence to the State Environmental Board in the fall of 1984. Brought soil samples, documents, photographs of the burial site. The Army sent a 3-star general and 2 lawyers. They dismissed everything. Called your grandfather's findings speculative, said his methodology was flawed, suggested he'd suffered some kind of mental breakdown related to stress. But he wasn't unstable. No, Mr. Brennan, he was right. Cordelia's voice was firm, carrying the weight of someone who'd watched this truth get buried and stay buried for decades. And the people who knew he was right made sure nobody listened. Marcus looked up at her. You believed him. My husband worked construction. Harold Hart. In 1976, his crew was hired to dig drainage trenches on the eastern ridge, right where your property is now. They found barrels, 55-gallon drums buried about 8 feet down, unmarked. Some of them were leaking this black sludge. Harold said it smelled like chemicals, like nothing he'd ever encountered. Her voice tightened, but she kept her composure. The foreman called it in. Within 2 hours, the Army showed up, cordoned off the whole area, brought in their own equipment, their own crew, paid Harold's team double their rate to keep quiet about what they'd found, told them it was a training exercise, old equipment disposal, nothing to worry about. Did they keep quiet? For 20 years. Then Harold got sick. Cordelia's hands trembled slightly as she closed the folder. Liver cancer. Rare kind. The doctors couldn't explain it. He'd never been a heavy drinker. Didn't work with toxic chemicals in any of his other jobs. But the cancer, it was aggressive. He died within 8 months of diagnosis. She looked at Marcus with eyes that had cried all their tears years ago and now held only steady determination. 3 other men from that same crew got the same cancer. All dead within 5 years. The 4th one moved to Oregon last I heard. Don't know if he's still alive. She paused. So yes, Mr. Brennan, I believed your grandfather. I believed him for 30 years. And I believe you found something that powerful people want to stay buried. Marcus traced his finger over the photograph of his grandfather, testifying this man he'd never known, but who'd fought the same fight Marcus was about to step into. How many people in town know about this? Now maybe a dozen who really understand. Most of the ones who cared are dead. Cancer, accidents, early deaths that raised eyebrows, but never enough to trigger real investigation. She opened another folder. I kept records, obituaries, medical histories people shared with me. Look at this. She spread out papers. Marcus saw the pattern immediately. 18 deaths over 30 years. All cancer. All rare types. All people who'd lived within a 5-mile radius of the Eastern Ridge. The state says it's within normal statistical variation, Cordelia said. But I've lived in small towns my whole life, Mr. Brennan. I know what normal looks like. This isn't it. Marcus pulled out his phone. I need to document this. Can I take pictures of anything you want? I've been waiting 40 years for someone to ask. She gestured at the files. Your grandfather tried to do this alone. Tried to take on the Army, the EPA, the state government all by himself. It didn't work. You're going to need allies. People who know the law, who know how to fight this kind of fight. I've got someone coming, a lawyer, Faye Ashford. Cordelia's expression shifted. Something like approval. I know Faye, good choice. She's represented 3 other environmental cases in Wyoming. 1-2 forced a settlement on the 3rd. She doesn't scare easy. Can I give her your contact information? Please do. And Mr. Brennan, Cordelia's voice softened. Be careful. The man who came to see you yesterday, Callaway Whitmore. Marcus felt ice slide down his spine. You know him. He's been in and out of Sundance for 15 years. Always around when there's a development project that doesn't quite make sense. Always well-funded. always connected to people who prefer to stay in the shadows. She lowered her voice, even though they were alone. 2 years ago, a reporter from Casper started asking questions about cancer clusters in Pine Valley. She interviewed me, interviewed families, started putting together a story. What happened? Her editor killed it, said the evidence was too circumstantial. 3 weeks later, she took a job in Denver. Never heard from her again. Cordelia's jaw set hard. Whitmore had dinner with her editor the day before the story got killed. Just a coincidence, I'm sure. Marcus felt something cold and familiar settle into his chest. The same feeling he'd had in Kandahar when intelligence came in about a target being more dangerous than briefed. "Thank you for this," he said. "Don't thank me yet. What you're walking into." She trailed off, then shook her head. "Just be ready. It doesn't end clean." The morning light slanted through the library windows as Marcus climbed the stairs, Odin's nails clicking softly against the worn wood. His mind churned through everything Cordelia had told him. The pattern of deaths, the silenced reporter, Whitmore's long shadow across this town. His phone buzzed. A text from Faye just crossed into Wyoming. "Be there in 90 minutes. Meet me at the sheriff's office." Marcus frowned. "Why the sheriff?" "Because you're going to need official protection. And because Dana Holloway is one of the good ones. Trust me." Sheriff Dana Holloway. The name meant nothing to Marcus, but if Faye vouched for her, that was enough. He headed back toward his truck, Odin trotting beside him. The streets of Sundance were beginning to wake up properly now. Shops opening, people moving with the slow rhythm of a small town where nobody rushed because there was nowhere urgent to go. He was almost to his truck when he saw Bertie outside Juniper's diner sweeping the sidewalk. She spotted him and waved. "Mr. Brennan." "Got a minute?" Marcus walked over. Odin sat at his heel, professional and patient. Bertie glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Heard you were at the library this morning, talking to Cordelia. Word travels fast. Faster than you think." She set the broom against the wall. "Listen, I don't know what you're digging into, but I want you to know something. My son James, he's 34 years old, diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia last year." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "The doctors can't explain it. He's always been healthy, doesn't smoke, barely drinks, works at the feed store, lives a quiet life." Her voice cracked slightly. "But he's lived his whole life on the east side of town, right near that ridge, same as everyone else who got sick." "I'm sorry." "Yo, don't be sorry. Do something." Bertie's eyes were fierce now. "If you've found proof, if you've got what your grandfather died trying to give us, then use it. Please." "I will. There's something else you should know." She glanced around again. "That man who came through yesterday. Whitmore. He was in the diner last night, late, after closing. I saw him through the window talking to someone in a car. Couldn't see who, but they were arguing. About what? Couldn't hear. But after the car left, Whitmore made a phone call. I heard him say the Brennan problem and needs to be handled quickly." She met Marcus's eyes. "I'm telling you because I want you to be careful. And because I want you to know that if you need help, there are people in this town who will stand with you." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. He'd been alone for so long, drifting from town to town, keeping everyone at arm's length. The idea that people he barely knew would risk standing with him felt foreign, dangerous even, but also necessary. "Thank you, Bertie." She picked up her broom. "James's boy, my grandson. He's 9 years old. I want him to grow up healthy. I want him to have the chance James might not get." Her voice steadied. "So you do what you need to do, and you let me know if there's anything I can do to help." The sheriff's office sat in a low brick building next to the volunteer fire station with an American flag and a Wyoming state flag hanging from a pole out front, snapping in the constant wind. Marcus pushed through the glass doors and found himself in a waiting area with linoleum floors, fluorescent lighting, and bulletin boards covered in community notices, wanted posters, and missing persons flyers. A deputy looked up from his desk, young, maybe 25, with the earnest expression of someone still new enough to the job to care deeply about every detail. "Can I help you, sir?" "Marcus Brennan. I'm here to see Sheriff Holloway. Faye Ashford asked me to meet her here." The deputy's expression shifted. "She called ahead. Sheriff's expecting you. And," he glanced at Odin, "your partner. Back hall, last door on the left." Marcus walked down a narrow corridor lined with framed photos of past sheriffs, all men, until the final frame, which showed a woman in uniform standing beside a patrol car, arms crossed, her expression serious but not harsh. Sheriff Dana Holloway. Her office door was open. She sat behind a metal desk covered in files, coffee cups, and a computer monitor that looked like it dated from the early 2000s. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore her uniform with the kind of precision that said she took the job seriously. Mid-40s, Marcus guessed. The kind of face that had seen enough to stop being surprised, but not enough to stop caring. She looked up as he approached, gestured to the chair across from her. "Mr. Brennan, have a seat." Marcus sat. Odin positioned himself beside the chair, watchful. Dana leaned back, studying him with the practiced assessment of someone who'd spent years reading people and deciding in seconds whether they were trouble victims or something more complicated. "Faye Ashford called me this morning," Dana said without preamble. "Told me you found evidence of contamination on your property. Evidence connected to a military cover-up from the 70s. That about right?" "Yes, ma'am." "She also said someone threatened you yesterday. Man named Callaway Whitmore. He made an unsolicited offer on my land. When I declined, he suggested I should be careful. Said accidents happen to people who dig into the past." Dana's expression hardened. "Did he threaten you explicitly?" "Not in so many words, but the message was clear. That's Whitmore's style, plausible deniability. Nothing you could take to court, but clear enough that you understand what he's saying." She pulled a file from her desk. "I've had my eye on him for years. He shows up whenever there's a development project that doesn't smell right. Always well-dressed, always polite, always connected to people I can't quite pin down. Cordelia Hart said he's been around for 15 years. At least, probably longer under different names." Dana opened the file. "2 years ago, I tried to investigate him, ran his plates, his business registration, everything. Know what I found? A shell company registered in Delaware. Offices in 5 states, none of which seem to have actual employees. Financial backing that traces back to a hedge fund in New York that specializes in environmental remediation and development. Front organizations." "Exactly. Someone's paying him very well to make problems disappear." Dana closed the file and looked directly at Marcus. "Now I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. What exactly did you find?" Marcus pulled out his phone, opened the photos he'd taken of the documents in the rail car, and slid it across the desk. Dana picked it up, scrolling through the images. Her jaw tightened with each swipe. Maps marked with contamination zones. Photographs of barrels being buried. Documents with Department of Defense headers and classified stamps. And the photograph of Colonel Evander Brennan testifying. "Jesus Christ," Dana whispered. "My grandfather tried to expose this in 1984. He disappeared in 1985. Dana set down the phone and her hands were shaking slightly. "My nephew Jasper, 9 years old, diagnosed with leukemia 6 months ago." Marcus felt the words hit him like a punch. "Bertie's grandson," he said. "Her great-nephew, my sister's boy." Dana's voice was tight, controlled, but Marcus could hear the rage underneath. Professional restraint barely containing something volcanic. "The doctors give him a 60% chance. He's in his 3rd round of chemo. He's 9 years old and he's losing his hair and throwing up blood and asking me why this is happening to him." She stood abruptly, walked to the window, her back to Marcus. "If what you're showing me is real, if there's proof that someone poisoned this town and got away with it for 50 years, she turned. "I want to see it. The original documents. Everything. They're in the rail car on my property. Then we go get them. Today, right now, before Whitmore or whoever he works for decides to make them disappear." Marcus stood. "There's something else you should know. Last night, 3 people came to the rail car. They had equipment, radios. They were documenting the site. Did you get a look at them? Too dark, but they weren't amateurs. They moved like professionals." Dana's expression went from angry to coldly tactical. "Then we don't have much time. If they're surveilling your property, they're planning something, either to destroy the evidence or to make sure you can't use it." She grabbed her jacket and her sidearm, checked the magazine, out of habit holstered it. "Let's go get your evidence, Mr. Brennan, and then let's figure out how to burn down whoever did this to my nephew." They were heading for the door when Marcus's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Brennan?" A young voice. Male, nervous. "Mr. Brennan, my name is Riley Kemp. I need to talk to you about Whitmore, please. It's important." Marcus stopped walking. "Who is this?" "I worked for Whitmore until this morning. I quit, but I have information you need about what he's planning. Can we meet?" Dana was watching him, reading his expression. "Where are you?" Marcus asked. "Juniper's Diner. I've been here since 6 a.m. I'm scared to go anywhere else." "Stay there, we're coming to you." Marcus ended the call and looked at Dana. Someone who says he worked for Whitmore wants to talk. Could be a setup. Could be, Bishti, but we won't know unless we check. Dana nodded slowly. All right, but I'm coming with you, and we do this smart. Juniper's diner was mostly empty when they arrived mid-morning lull between breakfast and lunch. Bertie was wiping down tables, and she looked up when they entered, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of the sheriff. Dana, everything all right? We're here to meet someone, Riley Kemp. You seen him? Bertie nodded toward a corner booth. Been here 3 hours. Ordered coffee and eggs, but barely touched either. Looked scared out of his mind. Marcus followed her gaze. The young man in the booth looked maybe 29, thin build, wearing a worn army jacket over a flannel shirt. His hands were wrapped around a coffee mug like he was trying to draw warmth from it. His eyes were red-rimmed either from lack of sleep or crying or both. Dana approached first, her hand resting casually near her sidearm. Not threatening, but ready. Riley Kemp. The young man looked up, and Marcus saw genuine fear in his eyes. Sheriff Holloway, thank you for coming, and you must be Marcus Brennan. He stood offering his hand, which trembled slightly. I know you have no reason to trust me, but please, just listen. Dana gestured to the booth. Talk. They sat, Odin positioning himself at Marcus's feet, watching Riley with professional assessment. Riley took a shaky breath. I'm former military intelligence. Got out 2 years ago, honorable discharge. But I've been struggling. Jobs are hard to find when your skills are surveillance and signal intercepts. 3 weeks ago, Whitmore approached me, offered me a contract. Background checks on a new property owner in Pine Valley. Standard security work, he said. Good pay. No questions asked. You were following me, Marcus said. Riley nodded miserably. Surveillance, documenting where you went, who you talked to, what you found. He swallowed hard. When you discovered the rail car, Whitmore's orders changed. He told me to make it inaccessible. Sabotage the access without making it obvious. Make it look like natural deterioration. And did you? Dana's voice was hard. No, I couldn't. When I saw that kid go missing yesterday, Riley's voice cracked. Jasper Holloway. I heard the radio calls, watched you and the dog going after him, and I realized what I was part of, who I was working for. Dana's expression shifted slightly. You were there at the search, on the ridge, watching. Whitmore had me monitoring the search efforts. He wanted to know if you found anything unusual, any evidence that might have been disturbed. Marcus leaned forward. What kind of evidence? Riley pulled out his phone, hands still shaking. I've been recording everything. Every conversation with Whitmore, every meeting. I know it's illegal in Wyoming without two-party consent, but I did it anyway because something felt wrong from the start. He opened a voice memo app. Files lined the screen, dated over the past 3 weeks. Whitmore's planning something big, Riley said. A controlled burn. He's been in contact with someone about creating a wildfire, making it look natural. Weather conditions are right. High winds, dry vegetation. Lightning strikes predicted this week. Dana's face went white. He's going to burn the forest. To destroy the rail car. The evidence. Everything. Riley scrolled to a recent file. This is from yesterday, after his visit to your property. He hit play. Whitmore's smooth voice filled the booth. The Brennan problem needs to be resolved quickly. He's already made contact with Ashford. If she files before we can neutralize the evidence, this gets exponentially more complicated. Initiate phase 2. Make it look natural. A forest fire in this area wouldn't be unusual, and it would solve multiple problems simultaneously. Another voice rougher. What about collateral, Whitmore? Acceptable if unavoidable. The priority is containment. The recording ended. Marcus felt ice flood his veins. Dana's hand was clenched into a fist on the table. He's talking about burning evidence, and he doesn't care if people are in the way. When? Marcus demanded. Riley looked at him with haunted eyes. I don't know exactly, but soon, maybe days. The weather window is closing. If he's going to do this, it has to be before the snow comes. Dana stood abruptly. We need to move those documents, now, before he can destroy them. There's more, Riley said. Whitmore isn't working alone. He mentioned a name yesterday, Senator someone. I couldn't hear clearly, but whoever he's protecting, it's someone with serious power. Marcus exchanged a look with Dana. We need Faye here for this, Dana said. She'll know how to handle evidence collection. Chain of custody. Everything needs to be documented properly or it won't hold up. As if summoned, the diner door opened and a woman walked in. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing jeans, hiking boots, and a canvas jacket. A leather briefcase hung from her shoulder. She scanned the room, found them in the booth, and walked over with the confident stride of someone who'd walked into 1,000 situations exactly like this and knew how to handle them. "Faye Ashford," she said, extending her hand to Marcus. "You must be Brennan." Her grip was firm, no nonsense. "Dana?" She nodded to the sheriff. Then her eyes landed on Riley. "And you are the whistleblower," Dana said. "He's got recordings of Whitmore planning to destroy evidence with a wildfire." Faye's expression didn't change, but Marcus saw her posture shift, sharper, more focused. "Let me hear them." They spent the next 20 minutes going through Riley's recordings. Faye took notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally stopping the playback to ask Riley questions. Who was present? What was the context? Where did the conversations take place? When they finished, Faye set down her pen. "This is good. Better than good. This is conspiracy to commit arson, destruction of evidence, and potentially criminal negligence causing death if we can tie the contamination to the cancer deaths." She looked at Dana. "But we need the original documents from the rail car. The recordings give us intent. The documents give us proof." "We're going to get them right now," Dana said. "I'm coming with you," Faye said. "I need to document everything in situ. Chain of evidence is critical." Riley spoke up quietly. "I'll help. It's the least I can do." Dana studied him. "You realize if you testify, you're putting a target on your back." "I know, but I can't be part of this anymore. If I stay silent, I'm just as guilty as Whitmore." Marcus saw something in the young man's eyes. The same thing he'd seen in the mirror after Martinez died. Guilt. The desperate need to make amends for something you can't undo. "All right," Dana said, "but you stay close to me. And if anything feels wrong, you tell me immediately." They took 2 vehicles to Marcus's property. Dana's patrol car and Faye's Subaru. The drive took 20 minutes, the landscape growing wilder and more remote with each mile. When they arrived at the tree line, Dana parked and immediately scanned the area with practiced tactical assessment. "Looks clear," she said, "but stay sharp." They hiked through the pines in a loose formation, Dana taking point, Marcus and Odin flanking Faye and Riley in the middle. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. No birdsong, no wind in the branches. Just the sound of their footsteps on pine needles. Odin's ears were up, rotating like radar dishes, processing sounds Marcus couldn't hear. Then the dog stopped. Every muscle went taut. His head lowered slightly. The posture Marcus knew too well. Danger. Close. Marcus raised his fist, the old signal for halt. Everyone froze. "What is it?" Dana whispered, her hand moving to her sidearm. "Odin's got something." They waited, breathing shallow, listening. Then Marcus heard it. The faint crackle of a radio. Voices, moving through the trees to their left. Dana gestured for everyone to get low. They crouched behind a fallen log, Odin pressed against Marcus's side. 2 figures moved through the forest 50 yards away. Both wearing dark tactical clothing. Both carrying equipment. One had what looked like a tablet. The other held a device Marcus recognized as a GPS unit. They were mapping the area, preparing. The figures moved past without seeing them, disappearing deeper into the forest toward the railcar. Dana waited a full minute before speaking. "They're scouting, getting ready for whatever they're planning. We need to get those documents before they come back," Faye said. They moved quickly now, covering the remaining distance to the railcar in 5 minutes. The door Marcus had left unlocked stood ajar. Someone had been inside. Dana drew her weapon. "Stay behind me." She cleared the rail car, methodically moving through the space with professional precision. Empty, but the inner room had been disturbed. The maps were still there, the photographs, the documents in their plastic sleeves. But someone had been through them, photographed them, documented them. "They know exactly what we have," Marcus said. Faye was already pulling evidence bags from her briefcase. "Then we take it all, right now, every piece of paper, every photograph, everything." They worked quickly, carefully placing each item in a separate bag, Faye photographing everything in place before removing it, documenting the chain of custody. They were almost finished when Odin's low growl cut through the silence. Marcus turned. A figure stood in the doorway. Callaway Whitmore. He wore the same expensive suit as before, though now it was slightly dusty from the forest. His expression was calm, almost pleasant, but the 2 men standing behind him were anything but pleasant. They were the same figures Marcus had seen mapping the area, and they weren't hiding their intentions anymore. Both held weapons, not pointed, but ready. "Mr. Brennan," Whitmore said with that same smooth voice. "Sheriff Holloway, Miss Ashford, what a convenient gathering." Dana's hand moved to her sidearm. "You're trespassing on private property." "Actually, Sheriff, I'm here representing parties with a legal interest in this land. You see, there is some question about the title. Irregularities in the original survey. I'm sure it's just paperwork, but until it's resolved, I'm afraid any items found on this property are in legal limbo. That's bullshit, and you know it, Faye said. Whitmore's smile didn't waver. Perhaps, but it will take months to sort out in court. And by then, he glanced at the ceiling of the rail car where rust had eaten through in several places. Well, structures this old have a way of deteriorating rapidly, especially during forest fire season. The threat was clear as daylight. We have recordings, Riley said, his voice shaking but determined. Everything you've said, everything you've planned. Whitmore's gaze shifted to Riley, and for the first time Marcus saw real anger flicker across that smooth facade. Mr. Kemp, I'm disappointed. We had an agreement. An agreement to commit crimes, Riley shot back. I'm not doing it. That's unfortunate. Whitmore looked back at Marcus. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave those documents here. You're going to return to your camper, pack your things, and leave Sundance. I'll triple my original offer, cash, transferred today. You can start fresh somewhere else. And if I refuse, then you'll discover that accidents happen in these woods. Fires start. People get lost. It would be tragic, especially for a veteran suffering from PTSD. Everyone would understand how someone in your condition might have made poor choices. Dana stepped forward, her badge catching the dim light. That's enough. You're threatening a civilian in front of a law enforcement officer. That's a crime. Is it? Whitmore pulled out his phone. Or is it just conversation? Just words. No witnesses except the people in this rail car. And who would believe them? A disgraced veteran, a sheriff from a tiny town, a lawyer with a reputation for taking on losing cases, and a former intelligence operative who violated wiretapping laws. He looked at each of them in turn. I'm offering you a way out. Take it. Marcus felt the weight of the moment, the choice crystallizing into something binary. Walk away and live. Stay and fight and risk everything. He thought about Martinez, about his grandfather, about Jasper and all the other kids who'd gotten sick from poison that had been buried and forgotten. He looked at Odin, who met his gaze with absolute certainty. We don't run. No, Marcus said, we're not leaving. Whitmore's expression hardened. Then you're making a serious mistake. He turned and walked out, his men following. But as he reached the door, he looked back. You have 24 hours to reconsider. After that, nature takes its course. They waited until the footsteps faded completely before anyone moved. Dana let out a breath she'd been holding. He just threatened us directly. And we have no proof, Faye said. No recordings, just our word against his. We have Riley's recordings, Marcus said, which won't be admissible in court because of how they were obtained, Faye replied. They're useful for us, but they won't hold up legally. Riley looked stricken. I'm sorry, I didn't think you did the right thing. Dana cut him off. We'll figure out the legal issues. Right now, we need to get these documents somewhere safe. They finished loading the evidence into waterproof bags and carried everything back to the vehicles. The forest felt different now. Hostile. Watching. Back at Dana's patrol car, they redistributed the documents between 3 vehicles to create redundancy. If one set was destroyed, the others would survive. Where do we take them? Marcus asked. Safe deposit boxes, Faye said. 3 different banks, Casper, Cheyenne, and Billings, geographical distribution. And then we make digital copies of everything. Upload them to secure cloud storage. Multiple redundancies. How long will that take? If we start now, about 8 hours. Dana checked her watch. It's noon. That gets us to 8 p.m. Then what? Then we file, Faye said. Simultaneously with the EPA, the Department of Justice, and the Wyoming Attorney General. Create a paper trail so wide they can't bury it again. And in the meantime, Marcus asked. In the meantime, we watch each other's backs, Dana said. Nobody goes anywhere alone. Whitmore said 24 hours, but I don't trust him to wait that long. They were loading the last box when Marcus's radio crackled. He'd forgotten he had it on old habit from downrange, always keeping a scanner running. All units, we have a report of a missing child, 9-year-old male, last seen near Pine Creek Trail, named Jasper Holloway. Dana's face went white. That's my nephew, she whispered. Then louder, grabbing her radio. This is Sheriff Holloway. I'm 10 minutes out. What's the situation? Child went for a bike ride this morning. Was supposed to be back by 11. Mother called it in at 11:45. We've got search and rescue mobilizing now. Dana was already running for her patrol car. Marcus and Odin were right behind her. "We're coming with you," Marcus said. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." They drove at speeds that would have been reckless anywhere else, Dana's lights and sirens clearing the road ahead. Faye and Riley followed in the Subaru. The search staging area was organized chaos. Forest Service volunteers, local sheriff's deputies, civilian volunteers spreading out with maps and radios. A woman stood near the command tent, her face tear-streaked, her hands shaking. Dana went straight to her. "Sarah, what happened?" "He just wanted to ride his bike, the trail we always use. I told him to be back by 11. When he didn't come," Sarah's voice broke. "Dana, he's been so weak from the chemo. If he's hurt, we'll find him," Dana said with a certainty Marcus recognized. The certainty you project when you're terrified but need others to believe. Marcus approached the search coordinator, a Forest Service ranger in his 50s. "I've got in K9, Marcus said, trained for search and rescue." The ranger looked at Odin, assessed with a professional eye. "Military time?" "Yes, sir. Explosive detection and patrol, but he's cross-trained for tracking." "Any recent scent articles?" Sarah rushed over, pulling a small jacket from her car. "He wore this yesterday." Marcus took the jacket, knelt beside Odin, and held it to the dog's nose. Odin inhaled deeply, once, twice, his entire body changing. The shift from companion to weapon, from pet to professional, his muscles tensed, his ears locked forward, his eyes fixed on the tree line with laser focus. Then he barked. Once. Sharp, clear. "I have it." "Which direction?" the ranger asked. Odin was already moving, pulling against his lead nose down tracking. Marcus let him lead, and they disappeared into the forest. Behind them, Dana and two deputies followed, radios crackling with search patterns and updates. Odin moved through the woods like he'd been born there, weaving between trees, jumping over fallen logs, never losing the scent trail. Marcus followed his SEAL training, kicking in, reading the terrain, watching for hazards. They ran for 18 minutes. Then Odin stopped at the edge of a narrow ravine, maybe 20 feet deep, rocky sides slick with moisture from a recent rain. Marcus's heart sank. Below, sitting with his back against a rock, was Jasper. The boy's face was streaked with tears and dirt. His left leg was bent at an angle that made Marcus's stomach clench. "Jasper," Dana called from beside Marcus. The boy looked up, his face lighting up despite the pain. "Aunt Dana, Mr. Brennan, Odin found me." "We're coming down," Marcus said, already assessing the descent. "Don't move. Keep still." He pulled a length of paracord from his pack, always carried, always ready, and rigged a quick rappel anchor around a sturdy pine. "I'm going down," he told Dana. "Looks like a fractured ankle, maybe worse." Dana nodded, her professional mask firmly in place, but Marcus could see the fear in her eyes. Marcus rappelled down quickly, his hands remembering the muscle memory from 1,000 training exercises. When he reached Jasper, he knelt, keeping his voice calm and steady. "Hey, buddy, I'm going to check you over, all right? Tell me if anything hurts worse when I touch it." Jasper nodded, trying to be brave. Marcus examined the ankle with the careful efficiency of combat medical training. Fractured, definitely. But the bone hadn't broken through the skin. The angle was bad, but it could have been worse. Much worse. "Okay, Jasper, I'm going to splint this. It's going to hurt a little, but then we'll get you out of here." He used branches and paracord to create a makeshift splint, working quickly but carefully. Jasper bit his lip, tears streaming, but he didn't cry out. "You're doing great," Marcus said. "Tougher than half the SEALs I served with." Despite the pain, Jasper managed a small smile. Marcus was securing the last wrap when he heard it. A mechanical click, then a hiss. Marcus's blood went cold. He knew that sound. "Cover your face." He shouted to Jasper, pulling the boy's shirt up over his nose and mouth. A small cylindrical object tumbled from above, trailing white smoke as it fell. Tear gas or smoke grenade, or worse. Marcus didn't wait to find out. He grabbed Jasper, pulled him close, and pressed them both against the overhang of the rock, using his body as a shield. The canister hit the ravine floor 10 feet away and began spewing acrid smoke that burned Marcus's eyes and throat. Above, Dana was shouting something, but Marcus couldn't hear over the ringing in his ears and Jasper's frightened crying. Then came a rumble, the sound of earth moving. Marcus looked up just in time to see the side of the ravine collapse, tons of dirt and rock sliding down in a wave of destruction triggered by the explosion. A trap. Someone had rigged this ravine, waiting for rescuers. Marcus grabbed Jasper and lunged to the side, rolling them both behind a larger boulder just as the avalanche hit where they'd been sitting. The world became noise and dust and fear. When it stopped, when Marcus could breathe again, he checked Jasper first. The boy was terrified but alive, unhurt except for the ankle. Marcus keyed his radio with shaking hands. Dana, we're okay, but someone booby-trapped this ravine. We need to get out now, different route. Dana's voice came back tight with fury. Copy. We're coming to you. Stay put. But Marcus was already scanning the ravine looking for another way up. The original path was blocked by rubble. Then he saw Odin. The dog stood at the top of the ravine on the opposite side 60 feet away, having circled around during the chaos. Odin barked once, then started moving along the rim, looking back every few steps to make sure Marcus was watching. Follow me. There's another way. Marcus lifted Jasper carefully, securing him in a fireman's carry, ignoring the screaming protest from his own damaged leg. Hold on tight, buddy. We're getting out of here. He followed Odin's path from below the dog, leading them to a less steep section of the ravine where a game trail provided natural handholds. Marcus climbed one-handed, Jasper clinging to his back, his splinted leg bumping against Marcus with each step. It took 8 minutes of excruciating climbing, but they made it. Dana was there at the top, pulling Jasper into her arms, checking him over with hands that shook despite her training. You saved him, she whispered to Marcus. Odin saved him. Marcus replied, his legs finally giving out. He sat down hard, his lungs burning from his hands bleeding from the climb. Odin walked over and sat beside him, close enough to lean against. Marcus wrapped an arm around the dog, buried his face in that thick fur, and for just a moment let himself feel the terror he'd been suppressing. They'd almost died. Both of them. Someone had turned a missing child into a trap designed to kill whoever came to help. And there was only one person in Sundance who had the resources and the motivation to do something like that. Back at the staging area, paramedics rushed to treat Jasper. The boy was loaded into an ambulance, Sarah climbing in beside him, her face a mixture of relief and horror at what had almost happened. Dana stood with Marcus and the search coordinator, explaining what they'd found. Someone rigged that ravine, she said, her voice hard as iron, placed a canister on a timer or a trigger. When Marcus went down to help, it went off, then triggered a collapse. The coordinator's face went pale. That's attempted murder. Well, that's exactly what it is, Dana said. She looked at Marcus. Whitmore said 24 hours, but he couldn't wait. He went after my nephew to send a message. Or to create chaos, Marcus said. Keep us distracted while he moves on the rail car. Faye appeared, having helped coordinate the outer search perimeter. We need to move. Now, get those documents secured before he makes another move. Dana nodded. I'm calling in state police. This is beyond local jurisdiction now. They worked through the afternoon and into the evening, driving between 3 different cities, securing original documents in safe deposit boxes, making multiple digital copies, uploading everything to encrypted cloud storage. By the time the sun set, they'd created enough redundancy that destroying one set wouldn't matter. The evidence was preserved. But Marcus knew that wouldn't stop Whitmore. It would only make him more desperate. They gathered at Dana's house around 8 p.m., exhausted, running on adrenaline and coffee. Jasper was upstairs sleeping off the pain medication the doctors had given him. His ankle was fractured, but would heal. He'd been incredibly lucky. Riley sat at the kitchen table, still looking shell-shocked by everything that had happened. Faye spread her notes across the table. I'm filing first thing tomorrow morning, simultaneously with EP, ADOJ, and the Wyoming AG. By noon tomorrow, this will be officially on the record. They won't be able to bury him. And until then, Marcus asked, until then, we stay together. Safety in numbers. Dana's radio crackled. A call from one of her deputies. Sheriff, we've got a report of smoke on the eastern ridge. Might be a campfire, might be something else. Sending a unit to check. Dana's face went white. Where on the eastern ridge? Near the old Hutchins property. Marcus was already moving toward the door. It started, he said. Whitmore's making his move. They piled into vehicles and raced toward Marcus's property, Dana's patrol car leading with lights and sirens. By the time they arrived, the smoke was visible, a dark column rising against the night sky. But it wasn't the rail car burning. It was the forest around it. Whitmore had started his wildfire. The smoke rose like a dark finger pointing at the stars visible from 5 miles away as they raced down the county road toward Marcus's property. The smell hit them first, burning pine hot and resinous, carrying on the wind that had picked up as the sun went down. Dana's radio erupted with chatter. Multiple units responding. Forest Service fire crews mobilizing. Evacuation warnings for the east side of Sundance. Marcus sat in the passenger seat of Dana's patrol car, Odin in the back, watching the orange glow grow brighter against the night sky. This wasn't a natural fire. This was tactical, deliberate, calculated to spread fast. They pulled up to the roadblock, where a Forest Service truck blocked further access. A ranger Marcus didn't recognize approached, flashlight in hand. "Roads closed, Sheriff. Fire's moving fast with these winds. We're evacuating everyone within 2 miles." "How many people?" Dana asked. "Maybe 20 families on the east side. We're going door to door now, but we've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" "Report came in 5 minutes ago. A family's unaccounted for, the Martins. They live near Pine Creek, about half a mile from the fire's current position. Wife called saying their truck won't start. They've got 4 kids." Marcus felt his chest tighten. Bertie's daughter, the family he'd met at the diner. "Where exactly?" Marcus asked. The ranger pulled out a map marked with red zones showing the fire's progression. He pointed to a spot that made Marcus's stomach drop. Right in the fire's path, maybe 20 minutes before the flames reached them. "Evacuation teams are trying to reach them," the ranger said, "but the main road is already cut off by fire. We're looking for alternate routes." Marcus studied the map. There was a service road that ran along the creek bed. Narrow, rough, but it might be passable. "I know a way," Marcus said. Dana looked at him. "Marcus, you can't." "Yes, I can. I have to." He looked at Odin, who met his gaze with absolute certainty. "We do this together." Dana's jaw set hard. "Then I'm coming with you. Once you need to coordinate evacuation, I'll go. Odin and I have done this before." That was a lie. They'd never run into a wildfire to save civilians, but they'd run toward danger plenty of times. This was just another mission, just another chance to not let someone die because he hesitated. "Take my truck," Dana said, tossing him the keys to a sheriff's department 4x4 parked nearby. "Better clearance than your vehicle, and take this." She handed him a radio. "Stay in contact. Any sign the route's blocked, you turn around. Understand?" Marcus nodded, though they both knew he wouldn't turn around if there were people who needed him. Faye grabbed his arm. "Marcus, this is insane. You could die." "People will definitely die if someone doesn't get them out." He climbed into the truck, Odin jumping in beside him. The radio crackled as he put it in gear. Dana's voice, "Godspeed, Brennan. Bring them home." The service road was barely more than a deer trail, rutted and overgrown branches scraping against the truck as Marcus pushed forward. The smoke grew thicker, reducing visibility to maybe 30 feet. He drove with his headlights on, following the GPS coordinates the ranger had given him, Odin sitting alert beside him, reading the night with senses Marcus couldn't match. The heat built like a physical presence. The fire was close, too close. Ash began falling like snow, coating the windshield, forcing Marcus to run the wipers constantly. Then he saw it through the trees, a house, small ranch style, lights on inside, a minivan in the driveway, hood up, steam rising from the engine. Marcus pulled up and hit the horn. The front door flew open and a woman appeared, Bertie's daughter, Rebecca. Marcus recognized her from the diner. "Thank God," she shouted. "Our truck died and we can't—" "Get everyone in my truck, now. We have maybe 10 minutes before the fire gets here." Rebecca turned and shouted into the house. 4 kids poured out, ranging from maybe 6 to 15. Behind them, a man Marcus assumed was Rebecca's husband carried 2 duffel bags. "Just the people," Marcus said. "No bags. We need to move light." The man hesitated, then dropped the bags and helped load the kids into the back of the truck. "Everyone buckled?" Marcus asked. A chorus of yes came from the back seat. "Hold on tight." He threw the truck into reverse, backing down the service road because there was no room to turn around. Behind them, through the trees, the fire appeared, a wall of orange and red moving faster than anything natural should move. The wind was pushing it, feeding it, turning it into a freight train of destruction. Marcus drove faster, the truck bouncing over ruts and rocks, branches scraping metal, kids crying in the back seat but holding on. Odin barked once, sharp, urgent. Marcus saw it at the same time, a tree engulfed in flames falling across the road ahead. He slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a stop 20 feet from where the burning pine crashed down. The road was blocked. "Everybody out," Marcus shouted. "We're going on foot." They piled out of the truck, Marcus grabbing the 2 youngest kids, one in each arm. The 15-year-old took the 6-year-old's hand. Rebecca and her husband carried the other 2. Odin moved to the front nose, working the air, finding breathable paths through the smoke. Marcus keyed his radio. "Dana, we're on foot, route blocked, following the creek bed south. We're going to need pickup at the junction with County Road 47. Static. Then Dana's voice, tight with worry. "Copy that. We'll be there." "How long?" Marcus looked at the terrain. The creek. The kids. 30 minutes if we're lucky. "Move fast, Marcus. The fire's accelerating." They moved through the smoke and heat, following Odin, who led them along the creek where the vegetation was thinner and the fire hadn't reached yet. The kids coughed and cried but kept moving. Marcus carried the two smallest ones, feeling the burn in his damaged leg, the titanium rod protesting with each step, but he didn't slow down. Behind them, the fire roared like a living thing. Trees exploded from the heat. The air itself seemed to scream. Flashbacks hit Marcus in waves. Kandahar. Fire. Smoke. Martinez screaming his name. But this time, he wasn't paralyzed. This time, he ran toward the fire, not away. This time, he didn't leave anyone behind. They were halfway to the pickup point when Odin suddenly veered left off the creek path toward a cluster of rocks. "Odin, no," Marcus called. "Wrong way." But the dog didn't stop. He barked 3 times, the warning pattern from Afghanistan, and kept moving. Marcus trusted the dog more than his own instincts. "Follow the dog," he shouted to the family. They changed direction, scrambling up a rocky slope, the kids helping each other, Rebecca crying but never stopping. 15 seconds after they left the creek bed, Marcus heard it. A massive tree crashed down exactly where they'd been walking. If they'd stayed on that path, it would have killed them all. Odin had sensed it. The instability. The danger. "Listen to the dog. Dogs know before we do." His grandfather's words echoed in Marcus's head. They climbed over the rocks and found themselves on higher ground where the fire hadn't reached yet. The smoke was thinner here, the air almost breathable. Marcus could see lights ahead, fire trucks, flashing police lights, the pickup point. "Come on," he urged. "Almost there." They stumbled into the clearing where Dana waited with 2 ambulances and a fire crew. Paramedics rushed forward, wrapping the kids in blankets, checking vitals. Rebecca collapsed into Dana's arms, sobbing. "He came for us. He drove right into the fire." "I know," Dana said, her voice thick. "I know." Marcus set down the 2 youngest kids, his legs finally giving out. He sat down hard on the ground, his lungs burning from the smoke, his hands shaking from adrenaline dump. Odin walked over and sat beside him, pressed against his side. Marcus wrapped an arm around the dog, buried his face in that thick fur. "You saved them," he whispered. "Again, you always save them." A paramedic appeared with an oxygen mask. "Sir, you need to—" "I'm fine. Check the kids." "The kids are fine. You're not." The paramedic placed the mask over his face. "Breathe slowly." Marcus inhaled oxygen, feeling it clear some of the smoke from his lungs. Over the paramedic's shoulder, he could see the fire still spreading, a massive wall of flame consuming his land. The rail car would be gone by now. Destroyed. But the documents were safe. Digital copies uploaded. Paper copies in 3 separate banks. Whitmore had destroyed the crime scene, but he hadn't destroyed the evidence. Someone touched his shoulder. Faye crouching beside him. "You did it," she said quietly. "You got them all out." "Odin got them out. I just followed." "The fire department says it'll burn for at least another day," Faye continued. "They're doing controlled burns to create fire breaks, protect the town. But your property? Gone, I know." Faye was quiet for a moment. "I filed the papers an hour ago, while you were in there, sent everything to EPA, DOJ, and the Attorney General simultaneously. By tomorrow morning, this is official, public record." Marcus pulled off the oxygen mask. "Whitmore. Disappeared. His SUV's gone. No one's seen him since this afternoon. He'll be back, or whoever he works for will send someone else. Maybe, but now we have federal agencies involved. State agencies. Media will pick it up once the filings go public. It's harder to bury things when everyone's watching." Dana appeared, her face streaked with soot and ash. "All families are accounted for. No casualties. Thanks to you." Marcus shook his head. "Thanks to Odin." Dana knelt, scratched behind the dog's ears. "Thank you, boy, for everything." Odin's tail thumped once against the ground. Around them, the fire continued to burn. But the people were safe. The evidence was secure. And for the first time since finding his grandfather's message, Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not peace, not yet, but purpose. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of interviews, depositions, and media attention that Marcus tried his best to avoid. The EPA launched a full investigation. The Department of Justice opened a criminal case. The Wyoming Attorney General announced a special task force to investigate historical environmental crimes. Soil samples confirmed everything Evander Brennan had documented 50 years earlier. Chemical contamination, radioactive isotopes, nerve agent derivatives, all leaching into the groundwater, spreading through the aquifer, poisoning the land and everyone who lived on it. The cancer cluster wasn't a mystery anymore. It was murder, slow and deliberate, and covered up for generations. Callaway Whitmore was never found. His shell companies dissolved overnight. The hedge fund that employed him issued a statement saying they'd terminated their relationship with Mr. Whitmore due to irregularities in his conduct. No arrests, no charges. The man who'd threatened them, who'd set the fire, who'd turned a child's disappearance into a trap, he vanished like smoke. But the investigation he tried to stop kept moving forward. 18 families filed a class action lawsuit. Faye represented them all pro bono, working 18-hour days. The federal government established a Superfund site designation for Pine Valley. Cleanup would take years, cost millions, but it was happening. The truth was out, and truth once freed is almost impossible to bury again. Marcus stood on the porch of the small cabin he'd built on what remained of his land. The fire had taken 40 acres, including the spot where the railcar had stood. But Dana had helped him navigate the legal process to reclaim another 120 acres that had been illegally seized from his grandfather decades ago. Brennan land, returned to a Brennan. The cabin was simple: one room, wood stove, shelves for books, a dog bed near the fireplace where Odin now lay, his shoulder fully healed, a patch of slightly lighter fur growing back where the burn from the fire had been. The dog looked up when Marcus approached, tail thumping against the floor in that slow, deliberate way that meant contentment. "Want to go for a walk?" Marcus asked. Odin stood immediately stretched and headed for the door. They walked down to a small lake at the edge of the property formed by the creek that had saved them during the fire. The sun was setting, painting the water gold and red and orange. The air smelled clean, the kind of clean that comes after fire and rain and new growth. Marcus sat on a fallen log that had become his favorite spot. Odin sat beside him, shoulder pressed against Marcus's leg. In Marcus's pocket was a letter from Bertie. Her son James was responding well to treatment. The cancer was in remission. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. On his phone was a message from Faye. The settlement negotiations were progressing. The families would be compensated. The land would be cleaned. It would take time, but it would happen. And in his heart was something Marcus hadn't felt in 6 years. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. He pulled out his grandfather's dog tag, the metal worn smooth from being carried in his pocket every day since he'd found it. Brennan Evanderjay. "I heard the dog, Grandpa," Marcus whispered to the gathering dark. "Just like you said, and he didn't let me give up." Odin shifted, rested his head on Marcus's knee, eyes closing in trust. Together they watched night fall over land that had been stolen, then reclaimed, then burned, then healed. And in the distance, in Sundance, lights began to appear in windows, families gathering for dinner, kids doing homework, life continuing in a town that had been poisoned but refused to die. Jasper was cancer-free now, according to Dana's last update. The boy asked about Odin constantly, wanted to know when he could visit the hero dog. Marcus smiled at that. Hero dog, if anyone was a hero, it was Odin, the dog who refused to quit, who led Marcus to the truth, who saved lives when it would have been easier to walk away. Marcus stood, brushed pine needles from his jeans. "Come on, boy, let's go home." They walked back through the pines, man and dog, two soldiers who'd found their way out of the fire, not unscathed, but together. And that made all the difference. Inside the cabin, Marcus lit the wood stove and poured coffee. Odin settled onto his bed with a contented sigh that sounded almost human. Marcus sat at his desk, a simple pine table he'd built himself, and opened his laptop. An email waited from a journalist in Denver. She wanted to write a long-form piece about what had happened, about Evander Brennan's fight, about Marcus finishing what his grandfather started. Marcus thought about it for a moment, then started typing. "My grandfather once said that dogs know the truth before we do, that they sense danger, sense purpose, sense what needs to be done, even when we're too scared or too broken to see it ourselves. I didn't believe him. I didn't even know him. But a dog named Odin taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't charging forward into danger. Sometimes it's refusing to leave when every instinct tells you to run. Sometimes it's trusting the quiet voice that says stay when the loud voice screams go. Sometimes it's listening to the dog." He hit send and closed the laptop. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the pines, carrying stories of what had been and what would come. And for the first time in a very long time, Marcus Brennan slept without nightmares. Because he'd learned something fundamental in that railcar, in that fire, in the fight that followed. The past doesn't have to define you, but honoring it, facing it, refusing to let it be buried in lies that can set you free. Epilogue. 6 months later, Marcus stood at the dedication ceremony for the Evander Brennan Memorial Park. The state had purchased 20 acres of the remediated land and created a public space with hiking trails interpretive signs explaining the history of Project Sentinel, and a memorial wall listing the names of everyone who died from contamination-related illnesses. 18 names carved in granite. Bertie stood beside Marcus, her hand resting on his arm. Her son James stood with them, healthy and strong, his hair grown back, his eyes bright. He would have been proud, Bertie said quietly, looking at the memorial. Your grandfather, he'd be proud of what you did. I just finished what he started. That's not nothing, that's everything. The ceremony began, the governor spoke, environmental officials spoke, Faye spoke about justice delayed but not denied, and then Dana stepped up to the microphone, Jasper beside her holding her hand. My nephew is alive today because a man and his dog refused to give up, Dana said, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. Because Marcus Brennan heard his grandfather's voice across 50 years and chose to listen. Because a German shepherd named Odin knew the truth before any of us did. She looked directly at Marcus. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear old field jackets and travel with four-legged partners who see the world more clearly than we ever could. The crowd applauded. Jasper ran over to Marcus, wrapped his arms around Odin's neck. Thank you for saving me, the boy whispered. Odin's tail wagged, and for just a moment, Marcus could have sworn the dog smiled. Later, as the sun set and the ceremony ended, Marcus and Odin walked the memorial trail alone. They reached the highest point where you could see the entire valley spread out below Sundance. In the distance, the cleaned-up contamination zones marked with new growth, the future taking root in soil that had been poisoned but was healing. Marcus pulled out his grandfather's dog tag one last time, ran his thumb over the engraved name. Then he knelt and buried it at the base of a young pine tree planted as part of the remediation. Rest now, Grandpa, Marcus said quietly. The fight's over. Truth won. He stood and Odin pressed against his legs, solid and warm and alive. They walked home as stars began to appear, and Marcus felt something settle into place. Something that had been broken for 6 years. Sometimes miracles don't arrive like thunder and lightning. Sometimes they arrive as a who refuses to quit, a friend who won't let you run, a truth that waits generations to be freed, and the courage to stay when leaving would be easier. Marcus Brennan came to Wyoming to disappear. Instead, he found what his grandfather had left behind. Not just evidence of a crime, but proof that one person standing alone against powerful forces can plant seeds that bloom decades later in the hands of someone who carries the same name, the same blood, the same refusal to let injustice win. In the cabin, Marcus poured 2 bowls of water, one for him, one for Odin, and they drank together. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the pines, carrying stories of what had been and what would come. And for the first time in his life, Marcus Brennan understood what home meant. Not a place, but a purpose. Not running, but staying. Not forgetting, but remembering. A final word. Sometimes we walk through life carrying weight we don't even know we're carrying. Guilt for things we couldn't prevent. Shame for battles we couldn't win. Grief for people we couldn't save. And sometimes when we're at our lowest, when we're ready to give up and disappear into places where nobody knows our names, sometimes that's when God places something faithful beside us, not to fix us, but to remind us we're not alone. Marcus found his purpose in a $900 rail car and a truth buried for 50 years. But he found his healing in a dog who refused to let him quit, who saw worth in him when he couldn't see it in himself, who led him toward danger because sometimes the only way out is through. Whatever you're facing right now, whatever weight you're carrying, whatever truth you're afraid to speak, whatever fight you think you've already lost, I want you to know something. You're not alone. There are people who see your worth even when you can't. There are truths waiting to be uncovered. There are fights worth staying for. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to leave. If this story touched you, please share it. Someone in your life needs to hear that staying is worth it. That one person with courage can change everything. Leave a comment and tell me. Which moment stayed with you? Was it Odin refusing to leave, Marcus going back into the fire? The truth finally coming to light? Subscribe for more stories about loyalty, faith, and second chances. Stories that remind us what it means to be human. What it means to fight for what's right even when the cost is high. We're building a community of people who believe that truth matters, that loyalty matters, that standing up against injustice even 50 years late still counts. Join us. And now a blessing. May God bless you and keep you. May He guide your steps through the fires you face. May He calm the fears that keep you awake. May He place faithful companions on your path, 2-legged or 4, especially when you need them most. May you have the courage to stay when leaving feels easier. May you have the strength to speak truth when silence feels safer. May you have the wisdom to listen to the quiet voices, the dogs, the conscience, the still small whispers that know the way forward when everything else is smoke. And may you always remember you are not alone, you are not forgotten, and your fight matters.